Hello children, welcome back to the another session on English literature. I hope you all are safe at home. So children, today we shall continue with the remaining part of lesson number 8, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Before we continue with the remaining part of the lesson, let's recapitulate what we have learned in the previous class. The present story tells us about the deductive abilities of Detective Sherlock Holmes and his partner Dr. Watson, who tries to figure out about a guy who had visited them in their absence and left a wooden stick behind. The story begins at the residence of Holmes, where his friend Watson is examining a walking stick. Watson examines the stick and gives his opinion that it might be of a country doctor who has walked a lot. Watson infers that the doctor must be a good man, and that's why he has received this as a mark of appreciation. However, when Holmes examines the stick, he has different conclusions. He finds out about the details where might this doctor be working. Other inscriptions on the sticks reads CCH, which they conclude and verify as Charing Cross Hospital. Now let's read further and know what happens next. Children, open page number 66 and go through the paragraphs. Do none suggest themselves. You know my methods. Apply them. I can only think of the obvious conclusion that the man has practiced in town before going to the country. I think that we might venture a little farther than this. Look at it in this light. On what occasion would it be most probable that such a presentation would be made? When would his friends unite to give him a pledge of their goodwill? Obviously, at the moment when Dr. Mortimer withdrew from the service of the hospital in order to start a practice for himself. Now children, Holmes has a unique ability to solve complex mysteries using the scantiest of the clues, the kind of things that the ordinary people might overlook. Here, Holmes concludes that Mortimer is a practitioner, and he thinks that Mortimer's co-worker might have given him the walking stick when he decided to withdraw from the service of the hospital in order to start up his own practice. Now children, let's continue reading. It certainly seems probable. You will observe that he could not have been on the staff of the hospital, since only a man well established in a London practice could hold such a position, and such a one would not drift into the country. What was he then? If he was in the hospital and yet not on the staff, he could only have been a house surgeon or a house physician, little more than a senior student. And he left 5 years ago. The date is on the stick. So your grave, middle-aged family practitioner vanishes into thin air, my dear Watson, and there emerges a young fellow under 30, amiable, unambitious, absent-minded, and the possessor of a favorite dog. Okay. Now Holmes goes on to suggest that Mortimer could not have been a part of the regular staff of the hospital, since it would be unlikely that someone in such a prestigious position would start up a country practice. Instead, Sherlock Holmes says that Mortimer must have been a house surgeon or a physician, that is more than a senior student. And if this is true, then the date on the stick is only 5 years old. And he makes Watson's assertion or conclusion that Mortimer was an old man as wrong. Holmes asserts that Mortimer as a young fellow who is under 30 years, amiable, unambitious, absent-minded, and he goes on to add that he is the owner of a dog. Here, amiable refers to sociable or friendly. Unambitious refers to not motivated. Absent-minded refers to does not pay attention to what is happening near them. And possessor refers to a person who owns something. I laughed incredulously as Sherlock Holmes leaned back in his settee. As to the later part, I have no means of checking you, said I. But at least it is not difficult to find out a few particulars about the man's age and professional career. From my small medical shelf, I took down the medical directory and turned up the name. There were several Mortimers, but only one who could be our visitor. I read his record aloud. Mortimer, James MRCS, 1882. Grimpen Dartmoor, Devon, house surgeon from 1882 to 1884 at Charing Cross Hospital. Medical officer from the parishes of Grimpen, Thorsley and High Barrow. Now children, Watson couldn't control his laughter. He started laughing incredulously. That means he was not able to believe what Holmes said. He points out how impossible it is to accept Holmes' deduction without meeting Mortimer. Further, he says that he can easily check the professional aspects like age and professional career using his medical directory. Finally, he finds that Mortimer was indeed a house surgeon at Charing Cross Hospital some years ago. Here, incredulously refers to not able to believe something. Now let's read further. A country doctor, as you were astutely observed. I think that I am fairly justified in my inferences. As to the adjectives, I said, if I remember right, amiable, unambitious, and absent-minded. It is my experience that it is only an amiable man in this world who receives testimonials. Only an unambitious one who abandons a London career for the country. And only an absent-minded one who leaves his stick and not his visiting card after waiting an hour in your room, has been in the habit of carrying this stick behind his master. Being a heavy stick, the dog has held it tightly by the middle and the marks of his teeth are very plainly visible. The dog's jaw, as shown in the space between these marks, is too broad, in my opinion, for a terrier and not broad enough for a mastiff. It may have been, yes, by Jove, it is a curly-haired spaniel. Holmes continues that Mortimer is a country doctor. In the Victorian era or age, country doctor or surgeons were seen as the lower class of the medical practitioner, as they touched the body of the patients. Physicians who simply prescribed medicines were considered the highest evolution of the career. Holmes further says that, according to his experience, only an amiable man, that means pleasant or friendly man in the world, was awarded the testimonials after years of faithful service. He is unambitious because he had left his London career for the country. And he also says that Mortimer is an absent-minded person because an alert person would have left his visiting card rather than leaving his stick after waiting for an hour in the room. Holmes further adds that Mortimer is the owner of the favorite dog. By his observation, Holmes says that the dog has the habit of carrying the stick behind the master. As the stick was heavy, the dog had held it tightly by the middle and the marks of the teeth can be seen on the stick. He further says that the dog must be between terrier and mastiff. Holmes claims decidedly that the dog is a curly-haired spaniel breed. Now let's continue. He had risen and paced the room as he spoke. Now he halted in the recess of the window. There was such a ring of conviction in his voice that I glanced up in surprise. My dear fellow, how can you possibly be so sure of that? For the very simple reason that I see the dog himself on our very doorstep. And there is the ring of its owner. Don't move, I beg you, Watson. He is a professional brother of yours, and your presence may be of assistance to me. Now is the dramatic moment of fate, Watson, when you hear a step upon the stage which is walking into your life, and you know not whether for good or ill. What does Dr. James Mortimer, the man of science, ask of Sherlock Holmes, the specialist in crime? Come in. Holmes is excited. He has just seen the dog at the front door. He asks Watson to stay and they both wait for Dr. Mortimer to come up. Now here, Holmes looks out of the window and gently mocks Watson's failure to come to the correct conclusion. Watson curiously demands to know how Holmes could possibly know the exact breed of the dog. Holmes says that it was simple. He had just seen Mortimer and his dog walking up to the apartment. Holmes and Watson prepares for the arrival of Dr. Mortimer, and Holmes asked Watson to stay back because he would feel comfortable as Mortimer was also a doctor. Now let's read further. Our visitor was a very tall, thin man, with a long nose like a beak, which jutted out between two keen grey eyes, set closely together and sparkling brightly from behind a pair of gold-rimmed glasses. He was clad in a professional but rather slovenly fashion, for his frock coat was dingy and his trousers frayed. Though young, his long back was already bowed, and he walked with a forward thrust of his head, and a general air of peering benevolence. As he entered, his eyes fell upon the stick in Holmes' hand, and he ran towards it with an exclamation of joy. "I'm so very glad," said he. "I was not sure whether I had left it here or in the shipping office. I would not lose that stick for the world." "A presentation, I see," said Holmes. "Yes, sir, from Charing Cross Hospital, from one or two friends there on the occasion of my marriage." "Dear, dear, that's bad," said Holmes, shaking his head. Dr. Mortimer blinked through his glasses in mild astonishment. "Why was it bad?" "Only that you have disarranged our little deductions. Your marriage, you say?" "Yes, sir, I married, and so left the hospital, and with all hopes of a consulting practice. It was necessary to make a home of my own." "Come, come, we are not so far wrong, after all," said Holmes. Now, children, Dr. Mortimer enters the apartment. On seeing Mortimer, Watson describes him as a tall, thin man with bad posture, and he has dressed in a very messy manner. When Dr. Mortimer sees the stick in Holmes' hand, he felt relieved and ran towards it with great joy. He says that he was not sure whether he had left it there or in the shipping office, and he was very happy that he did not lose it, because it means a lot for him. Holmes questions Mortimer to see if his earlier deductions were correct. They were mostly correct, except that Mortimer left Charing Cross Hospital after marriage, and his friends had presented him the stick on the occasion of his marriage. Here, jutted refers to extended out, slovenly refers to untidy, frayed refers to with the thread at the edge coming loose, and peering benevolence refers to kind and helpful. Now let's go through the last part of the lesson. I presume that it is Mr. Sherlock Holmes whom I am addressing and not. No, this is my friend Dr. Watson. Glad to meet you, sir. I have heard your name mentioned in connection with that of your friend. Sherlock Holmes waved our strange visitor into a chair. I presume, sir, said he at last, that it was not merely for the purpose of examining my skull, but you have done me the honour to call here last night and again today. No, sir, no, though I am happy to have had the opportunity of doing that as well. I came to you, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, because I recognize that I am myself an unpractical man, and because I am suddenly confronted with a most serious and extraordinary problem. As a practical man of affairs, it is acknowledged that you stand alone. I think, Dr. Mortimer, you would do wisely if without more ado you would kindly tell me plainly what the exact nature of the problem is in which you demand my assistance. Now Mortimer says that he knows Holmes and Watson by reputation. He goes on to talk at length about Holmes' skull. Mortimer is convinced that Holmes' skull must be as unique as the man himself. He explains that he studies skull shapes. Finally, Holmes asks why Mortimer has called on him. For that, Mortimer replies that he has confronted with a most serious and an extraordinary problem for which he needs Holmes' assistance. So children, here I complete lesson number 8, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. If you have any doubt, feel free to clarify. Thank you.